In this video, we'll go over the global panel and the synth panel of Iris. As its name implies, the global panel contains controls which govern all of Iris. Now, I want to return to the options menu for a moment and look at a few more advanced settings. The library section is fairly mundane, and it configures itself automatically during installation. But if you need to move Iris to another computer, or if you want to move its library to a different media drive, Iris will let you do that, and this is where you make those changes. And now that you know how to use the spectrogram, let's take a look at some advanced options. You can change the frequency scale of the display. Now, this isn't going to change how it sounds, it only changes the appearance of the spectrogram, and doing this will make different kinds of visual editing easier. The two most popular options are going to be log and linear. Log, which is short for logarithmic, will tend to give you a more musically useful presentation. It's going to put the frequency range that covers most musical notes towards the middle of the screen. And it'll spread out the harmonics, which are those horizontal white bands, a little more evenly. If we switch to linear, the display looks more like a spectrum analyzer. But the musical frequencies, if you will, which are basically 55 Hz up to about 7,000 Hz, they are all crunched together at the bottom. So if your goal is to work with the musical parts of your sound, the log view is going to put them sort of front and center. But if you want to work with the really high-end or really low-end frequencies, then the linear mode will make those easier to find and fix. The other modes are variations on that same theme, and you can experiment with them to see which ones present the spectrogram to you in a way that's most useful for your style of editing. Now, you also have controls here for spectrogram type. Auto is probably fine for most editing, but you do have the option to switch it to precise for really delicate work. Finally, I just want to point out that the options menu here is where you're going to configure your root note detection, which we'll leave in auto detect for now, and this is also where you configure the pitch bend range. Okay, let's move to the patch browser. For one thing, you can undock it. That lets you resize it. And you can unfold the full browser. Now, this view gives you access to the Samples tab. The Samples tab lets you search for individual waveforms. The left column is the folder column, and the actual waveforms will appear in the right hand under Files. And if you twirl down the reveal triangle for synthetic instruments, you can see that this folder has some real classics in here, like the CS80. Now, if you want to hear them, enable the preview function. Once you've located something that you like, you can drag it right to the spectrogram. You can also click the Load button to access your computer's file structure if you want to load up samples of your own. So let's switch back to the simple browser and redock it by clicking the Undock button again. And of course, you can also step through your presets using the arrow keys. Now, these next controls, the undo, voice count, voice mode, all pretty self-explanatory. So are the master pan, master gain controls. But I want to open the synth panel for a moment. Now, we've already seen how to select the different voice pools. And when you turn the All view on, you see all of your waveforms at once. But you only see the voice control for the one that you have highlighted. However, if we open the Mix window, now you can see all of the control panels, and you still have a mini waveform for each one. Plus, you get this master panel. And the entire Mix window can be undocked. Now, this is actually probably the handiest window to undock because you can really sort of spread out and work. But I'm going to keep it docked to make the video a little easier to shoot and see. At the top of the master panel are some different effects controls. Iris has a built-in loudness control, which is similar to a compressor. And you can choose to use the master effects, which are down at the bottom, as sends if you want to. Now, this lets you dial in a different amount for every voice. Or you can switch back to master mode and all 4 voices run through one set of master effects. At the very bottom of the screen are the controls for each of those 4 effects. But to keep this thing moving along, I'm going to assume that everybody watching already knows their way around an effects unit. So back to the master panel. Now, are you ready? Here it is, the filter section. No matter what else you do with a synthesizer, it just is not a synth until you get to play with the cutoff frequency. Now I'm going to actually turn the filter envelope off for a second to give me more direct manual control. And now it feels like a proper synth. And I can right-click and assign the cutoff to the mod wheel or to any of the macro knobs, which are freely assignable soft controls. We'll go over how to set up and use the macro controls in the chapter on the keyboard panel. The master panel is also where you access the MIDI learn function. This lets you map a MIDI controller to just about any parameter in Iris. When you click on MIDI learn, anything assignable turns blue. Just click on the parameter that you want to map, which then turns red, obviously. Touch the control on your MIDI keyboard, and when the parameter turns orange, you know that the assignment worked. Click MIDI learn again to exit, and now your controller and your parameter are linked. The mix view also lets you solo and mute individual voices, and you can work with each envelope to control how the sound behaves over time. So if I wanted this patch to fade in, I could go through and increase the attack time here for each envelope. But let's undo that, this time using the undo button, because there's an easier way. If you enable these link buttons, anything you do to one voice affects all the other linked voices in the same way. If I want to work with just 1 and 3, link those two together, and only those two, and edit away. Finally, we have LFO modules for each voice and a global LFO. LFO stands for Low Frequency Oscillator, and it's used to create a timing source to control other parts of the synth. Let's use the global LFO for a quick demonstration. Turn it on, then pick out its waveform or its pattern. Let's change this to a saw up, and that way whatever we point it at will kind of ramp up and drop off. Now use the destination menu to pick out what you want it to control. And let's leave this on filter cutoff frequency. Now just adjust the depth and rate until you get the effect you want. And of course, you can use the sync control to lock this effect to the tempo of your song. And here's one more cool trick. Change the waveform to S and H, which stands for sample and hold. Then set the depth pretty high, like around 85%, so we can really hear the effect. And dial down the rate to something around 6.5. Then you play it like you would an arpeggiator by holding some chords and getting some movement. Now it's time for us to get moving to the next chapter and look at the Tools panel.